Hello. The purpose of this video is to give you a brief overview of the USA National Phenology Network and everything that we have achieved since we were established about 12 years ago. I'm Theresa Crimmins, the current director of the USA National Phenology Network. So why phenology? Phenology is the timing of seasonal events in plants and animals. Things like when plants put on their leaves, or leaves change color in the fall, or when birds migrate. This is an important ecological characteristic because it's highly integrative. Phenology is both a driver of ecosystem functioning as well as a response variable, and can tell us an awful lot about what is happening at a location at a specific time of year. It's also an excellent indicator of how plants and animals and ecosystems are responding to changing climate conditions, and can be highly beneficial to supporting a wide range of management decisions. The timing of when things occur, like when leaves are put on by plants, is very easy to identify and track, and is something that even children can understand. And so therefore it's an excellent measure for communicating with the general public as well. And so what I will be covering very briefly here is how the USA National Phenology Network went from an idea shared by a couple of individuals back in the early 2000s to an organization that delivers science and information that appears on the Today Show with Al Roker. The purpose of the USA National Phenology Network is to collect, store, and share information and data on the timing of seasonal events in plants and animals. We make these data and data products available to support fundamental advancement of science, to support a wide range of decisions, to communicate with the general public about what phenology is and why it matters. And most recently, we added this plank to our strategic plan to create an equitable and inclusive network, because we recognize that without concerted effort in this realm, there would be audiences that would be less likely to benefit from our activities and the things that we're doing. The activities that the USA-NPN undertakes generally can be captured along this workflow, where on the left, we work with potential end users, either data analysts or decision makers, to identify what kind of information they really need that represents when things are happening over the course of the year. We use that to guide data collection. Then if necessary, we either establish models or relationships between the driving variables and the response of the phenology. And then we use that prediction or that relationship to generate map and forecast data products. So we're going to focus first on the left-hand side of the graphic here. How do we get the fundamental data? One of the main activities that the USA National Phenology Network does is to run a program called Nature's Notebook, which is a plant and animal phenology program. It is appropriate for both professional scientists as well as citizen scientists and volunteers, all the way down to school children who can participate with some guidance. At the core of this program are a suite of standardized observation protocols that are available currently for about 1,400 species of plants and animals. These protocols are what we call status protocols, which means that every time you make an observation, you are faced with a series of yes/no questions about what you're observing on your organism. So the questions are things like, do you see breaking leaf buds, or do you see open flowers? And you can respond yes or no, and there's also an option for to submit a question mark if you're not certain. The reason why status protocols are important is because it enables us to have an amount of error around when an event actually occurs. If we have a series of no responses preceding a yes response, then the span of days that occurred between that last no and that first yes is your error around when that transition actually occurred. In addition, every time an observer responds yes to one of the questions, they are prompted with a follow-up question regarding the intensity or abundance of the event. And so if an observer reported, yes, I do see open flowers, they are prompted with a question something like, what % of the flower buds on this plant are open today? And the responses are in bins, and they are things like less than 5%, 5 to 25%, 26 to 50%. So that the intent is that the protocols are rigorous enough to yield data that are of sufficient quality to support science and management, but also are straightforward enough that a non-scientist or a non-professional can accurately and with confidence answer the questions correctly. When we developed those protocols, we worked closely with the remote sensing community to ensure that the ground observations would be as useful as possible to that particular community for interpreting alongside data coming from satellites. For the Nature's Notebook program, we offer extensive training materials and support products to help ensure that observers are as prepared as possible for making high quality observations. And participants can submit data either using paper data sheets that are then transcribed online through the online interface, or use mobile apps that are appropriate for, that work on Android and iPhone platforms. The mobile apps work outside of Wi-Fi and cell range and log the data locally. And we've gone through several iterations of app development to arrive at one that's very straightforward and simple to use. And now we have about half of our data coming in through the mobile apps. Finally, these protocols have been adopted widely by many organizations, including the National Ecological Observatory Network. And we recently ingested the over 2.5 million records that NEON has collected at their 78 observing locations into our database. This map shows the distribution and depth of data that have come in through Nature's Notebook. And you can see that we've collected over 21 million records of phenology across the country since this program launched in 2009. Some of the largest circles representing some of the richest data records are originating from NEON sites. We've had over 40,000 individuals submit or sign up to participate in Nature's Notebook over the years, and about half of them have gone on to submit data, which is actually a really high proportion for a citizen science program. In addition to encouraging volunteers, individuals to participate in Nature's Notebook, we also very actively cultivate participation among groups or collections of individuals that would work together and share the responsibility of making observations on the same plants. We have over 500 such partner groups contributing data to Nature's Notebook, including groups of individuals at many national parks and Fish and Wildlife Service units, as well as many academic institutions and even some tribal colleges and universities. The benefits of having groups participate is that when individuals share the responsibility for making observations, the data records that result tend to have more frequent observations, yielding higher precision around when phenological transitions occur, as well as a longer duration of time that plants and animals tend to be observed at the sites. A big thing that we do is work hard to encourage groups of individuals to participate for reasons that they identify. We work hard to ensure that groups identify their own reasons for participating, because that ensures that they will participate for a longer period of time. And finally, we offer a formal certification process to train and guide leaders through getting their groups set up and sustaining monitoring. And that class, that course, which is about a 10-week course, has now graduated over 150 certified leaders. This graph shows that we have seen steady growth in the data that have been coming in through Nature's Notebook since the program launched in 2009. And what we see is that we see greater growth in records coming from members of local phenology programs, or the groups that I mentioned previously. This again is a good thing because, again, the data that come from groups tend to be of even higher quality and more suited for the science and decision applications that the program is intended to yield data for. So I have just a couple of slides here to walk you through what it takes to join and participate in Nature's Notebook. It's very simple, actually. Even though we have set up the program to yield rigorous data that are of high quality, at the bar or the barriers to participation are intended to be as low as possible. The general steps are to set up a profile or an account with Nature's Notebook, then set up your account and the specifics, and then get out and start observing. So this is a screen cap of my dashboard within Nature's Notebook. Once you are set up, you can register individual sites where you would make observations. And then at each site, you register plants or animals. From this dashboard, you can manage your sites and your plants and animals that you are observing, as well as access specific information about what you are observing and how you observe it for each one of your plants and animals. And then finally, from this dashboard, you can opt to enter your observation data if you want to use the online interface. You can readily download all of the data that you have submitted, and you can view your data directly in the online visualization tool. We also make access to all of the data that have been submitted to Nature's Notebook very easy. It's all open and freely available. We make it available through tools such as this animation, what this animation is demonstrating, which is an online interface where you can query specifically what you want based on either date range, location, species, or other parameters, and download that as a text file or Excel file. We also offer an R package and web services or APIs for connecting to the database directly. And we have ancillary data that you can also download with the data, things like monthly and seasonal climate data summaries and MODIS-based remote sensing information. We also offer a visualization tool online where you can explore temporal and spatial patterns in the data. This plot, or the animation that is running here, is demonstrating that the user has plotted the abundance of open flowers and common milkweed in the green line here, and is also plotting alongside of that, the activity in monarchs at the same location in 2019. And you can see that once the plots are all created, that the phenology of those two events aligned pretty well in that particular year. Moving on from the data to the predictive models that we use once we have the data, one really good example of predictive models that we implement is something that predates the establishment of the USA National Phenology Network, but that's something that we've become to be known for really well, and those are the spring indices. These models generally represent the onset or the leading edge of biological activity in the springtime, and are models that were established by Dr. Mark Schwartz of the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee using long-term observations of lilacs and honeysuckles. To generalize, these models are a function of heat accumulation in the spring season following the start of the year. And what this plot is showing is that as heat is accumulated after the first of the year, you eventually reach a threshold that triggers the leaf out model. And then if you continue to accumulate heat, you eventually also reach what is called the bloom index. We have taken those models and applied them, analyzed them in conjunction with historical, real-time, and future climate data to generate a suite of map and forecast products, enabling us to predict when those leaf and bloom indices were met, or when biological activity was predicted to occur, both in the past, in real time, and into the future. And so that's what I'm going to walk you through now. This map here is depicting when the conditions were met for the spring leaf index in 2020 as of March 9th. And so every place that is orange represents when, where that the conditions for that leaf index have already been met. And what we can do after we have established when those conditions were met is compare those to when those conditions were typically met in the recent past. And so in this map and in this animation, what we are doing is differencing the day of year that the leaf index was met this year in 2020 to when it was met on average over the period of 1981 to 2010. And what you can see is that in this year, the leaf index was much earlier, in some cases 3 and up to 4 weeks earlier than it had been on average in those previous 30 years. We can also take that leaf index and combine it with daily Tmin and Tmax data from historical times, and then evaluate how the timing of the start of spring using the leaf index has changed. And so these two plots are showing the change, the trend in time of how much that leaf index has changed. On the left side here, we are looking at about a 100-year period, and on the right, we're looking at the last, a recent few decades. And you can see that when you look at the trend over different time periods, you can see that the both the direction and the magnitude of the change can vary dramatically. We can also use this information to project forward, and these maps are showing how the leaf index is predicted to advance under a high emissions scenario in the coming decades. And then finally, these maps and that we have been generating have been picked up very regularly and recently in the news media in the last couple of years. Both 2017 and this year, 2020, have been characterized by a very early spring, and our maps have been picked up by many outlets. The purple animation in the upper left was from the front page of the New York Times in 2017, and in the lower right is a screen capture. I was fortunate enough to be interviewed by Jim Cantore on the Weather Channel this year. Some of the other maps are showing how TV meteorologists were able to grab KML files of our leaf index anomaly and use it to help tell their stories about how spring was arriving early in their part of the country and what that might mean in terms of early warmth and early growth in folks' yards and for their seasonal allergies. So a couple of ways that these maps have been used this current spring in 2020 are to show both that allergies have been starting early in much of the country, as well as that the cherry blossoms in the tidal basin were being impacted in the form of an early spring as well. And then finally, there was some activity on Twitter recently. Dennis Tody is the director of the Midwest Climate Hub, and he was using our maps to tell the story that early warmth can actually spell bad news for specialty crops, especially if there's still a risk of frost that can come after plants initiate their springtime activity. Some of the other products that we offer here at the USA National Phenology Network are growing degree day maps. The map on the left shows the accumulation of growing degree days, which is a way of representing warmth. Warmth in 2020 is far ahead of schedule, as shown by all of the areas that are orange. This plot here is taken from a location near Boston and is something that can be accessed through our online visualization tool, and it is showing the accumulation of warmth after the first of the year. The blue line represents 2020, and the red tail on the end is the short-term forecast. And you can compare that to the black line, which is the long-term average, or the orange line, which is last year. And what you can see again is that heat accumulation in this location has been ahead of schedule for the entire year and is continuing to be predicted to be ahead of schedule. And when we hover over a particular day, you can see that we are over 3 weeks ahead of schedule at this location right now. This information is really valuable in trying to anticipate when different seasonal activities may occur, and can be very valuable in helping to plan for management activities in the current season. A good example of that is the suite of maps that the NPN produces, which we call Pheno forecasts. These are produced by taking our daily growing degree day maps and combining them with models that represent when activity will occur. Especially in the agriculture and the pest fields, the amount of heat that needs to accumulate to trigger an event like leaf out or egg hatch has been established for quite a few species. And so what we have done is try to identify species for which being able to predict a certain life cycle event would really help with planning, and then apply that to our growing degree day maps to generate maps of when we think something might occur. So in this case, we're looking at the forecast for emerald ash borers. Emerald ash borers are insects that have been decimating ash tree populations all across the country. And they spend most of their life cycle under the bark of the tree. However, when they hatch into their adult stage, they do emerge from the bark of the trees and start flying around. And then there's about a 2-week window before they start to lay eggs and thereby spread to additional trees. And so that window, when the adults are hatching and flying around, is actually a really important time where managers can try to trap and control the spread. It's been established that adults emerge around 450 growing degree days. And so what we have done is taken that threshold and apply that to our growing degree day maps, which are updated every day. And we generate these maps, which indicate when we think that adults are probably emerging and flying around. And that's represented in the yellow zone on the map. And so these maps are updated nightly, and folks who might care about knowing when adult emerald ash borers are going to be emerging can consult these maps to identify if their location is approaching when that thing is expected to occur. Another thing we offer, in addition to making these maps available on our website and through our visualization tool, is for users to sign up to receive notifications for their specific location. So in this location, because we are currently in a zone where we are approaching when adults are likely to emerge, that would trigger an email to come to this user that says, hey, watch out, the adult emerald ash borers are going to start emerging in the next couple of weeks. And so that would be a trigger for managers to start preparing to get crews out and hopefully have the equipment that they need. We make those pheno forecasts available for 12 insect pests presently. And because they were well received by user populations, we took that approach and extended it and applied it to generating short-term forecasts that predict green up in Buffelgrass in southeast Arizona, or actually in all of Arizona. These maps are based on the recognition that the plant greens up after a certain amount of rainfall has fallen during our summer monsoon season within a particular period of time. And so based on the accumulation of precipitation, the maps indicate whether the plant is likely to be green on a particular date, and is intended to help managers who need to decide and prioritize among a bunch of properties which properties may be the most likely to have green plants and be most appropriate for treatment with herbicide. This model and the format that they are delivered in were inspired by end users in the region and developed in close collaboration with them to yield a product that was of most value to them. Another suite of products that we recently released are land surface phenology data products, which return for users things like when lands are beginning to show green up, when they are expressing peak green up, and when green up is starting to decline over the country. So how are these data products and infrastructure used by others? Scientists have used USA-NPN data and products in over 80 peer-reviewed publications. Generally, these fall into a couple of different categories. They've been used to help establish fundamental drivers to phenology. They've been used to document how the timing of life cycle events is changing, as well as in comparing ground-based observations to satellite information. In a number of cases, researchers access and use our data in their science without our awareness. In many cases, we aren't even aware that the data are being used until we see a publication come out. And this is a true testament to the quality of the data and the trust that scientists have with the data, as well as the ease of access and the documentation that we make available. Here is one example of where researchers accessed our data and are using them to generate short-term forecasts of when events are expected to occur across plants distribution. In this application, researchers out of the University of Florida are generating forecasts for thousands of phenological events in hundreds of plants across the country. This is another great example where researchers were able to leverage phenology observations from both the US and from Europe using the recently created and established phenology plant ontology. And these data were used in an analysis that showed that in urban areas, phenology is advanced compared to surrounding rural areas, but that relationship only holds at higher latitudes. Once you get below a certain latitude, say down into Florida, phenology in urban areas is actually delayed. And this is an example of the kind of novel science that's being made possible by the rich data resource that's coming in through Nature's Notebook. Another way that our data are being used quite regularly is in comparison with information that's coming in through satellites. And the graph on the right is one example of this, where quite often researchers compare when the start of the season, as indicated by plants being observed on the ground, is being compared to the start of season as indicated by the satellite-borne information. And finally, this is a really cool example where researchers were able to take contemporary phenology observations coming in through Nature's Notebook and combine them with decades worth of observations that had been collected and stored in herbaria, and use those to establish what the drivers of flowering were in hundreds of species. And what they were able to identify is that a few key variables, things like the number of frost-free days or the beginning of the frost-free period, as well as the percent of precipitation falling as snow, were key drivers in many species. And these are phenomena that are not typically included in phenology models. One of the ways that we support researchers is by running campaigns with our observers in Nature's Notebook to help collect data that researchers otherwise would not be able to collect. Here are some of the campaigns that we have run where we have encouraged Nature's Notebook observers to make observations on certain species to help support research. This is one such example where a researcher based at Penn State was exploring the relationships in phenology in both invasive shrubs and native shrubs. The map on the left shows that we had over 1,000 Nature's Notebook observers submitting data on the species that she was interested in. And using these data, she was able to demonstrate that the phenology of invasive shrubs is advanced in comparison to native plants. However, this relationship diminishes as you go further up in latitude. This is just one of dozens of examples of how management agencies or partners are using our data to support their management and decisions. On Midway Atoll out in the Pacific Ocean, Verbicina is this yellow forb that you see, has really taken over a lot of the land area. And managers were trying to figure out the best way to control this species. And they recognized that the plant undergoes flowering and fruiting at various times of the year. And they recognized that it was really important to be able to undertake control measures like pulling the plants before the plants go to seed, so that they're not spreading the seed as they are disturbing the plants and trying to pull them up. And so they documented the phenology of the plants over a couple of years, and were able to identify that the period when the plant does not have seeds on it is anywhere from 35 to over 70 days long. And they use this information then to say, okay, then that means that we need to go out and sample and pull more frequently than that so that we can minimize the spread of seeds. This plot is a good example of the kind of plot that you can generate using our online visualization tool. This is another example of how we are supporting Fish and Wildlife Service, one of our key partners. This dashboard enables refuge managers to zoom in on their particular refuge and look to see how the start of spring in this year compares to the timing of the start of spring in other years. And then finally, we have hundreds of partner organizations that use Nature's Notebook in other ways as well. This is just one excellent example where the Oregon Season Trackers, which is a group that it's a collaborative effort through Extension, as well as the LTER station, H.J. Andrews Experimental Forest, where they engage members of the public as well as local landowners and researchers in collaboratively tracking phenology of many plants, as well as collecting precipitation observations through the CocoRa's volunteer precipitation network. And finally, we have also been able to support a greater understanding and appreciation for phenology through the participation in many really excellent programming opportunities as well, including the Crowd in the Cloud series, the American Spring Live program, the Brains On podcast, and the SciGirls PBS show. We are also, as I mentioned earlier, really interested in ensuring that the activities that we undertake and the programs and tools that we generate benefit all members of the US population. And so we are putting concerted effort into ensuring that what we do is equitable and inclusive. And so one quick example of that is that we have participation in the Indigenous Phenology Network, and we are working closely with members of tribes and Native American cultures to make sure that tracking phenology is benefiting them as well. And so we bring many strengths and a great deal of capacity, including a rich observational data set and the infrastructure necessary to maintain those data and access them in a variety of ways. A workflow for operationalizing forecasts and really good delivery and public awareness of those forecasts. We emphasize both science and management applications and equally engage with both science and management communities. And finally, we undertake a great deal of communication and outreach, and we have a national reach. We're a small team of about 10 individuals based at the University of Arizona, and that is where our IT infrastructure sits as well. And we have in the past been funded primarily by the US Geological Survey, as well as the Fish and Wildlife Service through co-op agreements with low overhead. We offer a great deal of bang for the buck and are excited to continue to be a super high functioning organization. Thank you so much, and I look forward to talking with you more about all the great stuff that we do and how we might work with you.